Welcome everyone to this tutorial about the IG publisher presented by José, Costa, Teixeira. Thank you for your attention. I will be your moderator today, and well, over to you, José.
Hi everyone, welcome. In this session we are going to look at some of the things that we have done to help in the production of implementation guides, so to industrialize the production of implementation guides. So some of the tricks, some of the things that we learned in Belgium while setting up the Belgian implementation guides. So I would like to share with you a few things that we learned and a few ideas, and hopefully also get some feedback and validation of whether those ideas were in the right direction or not. So I presume that you can see my screen. And so first, a bit about who I am. So I'm a consultant. I'm working with IMEC and with a couple of institutions in Belgium. So the Flemish Agency for Health and Care, and the RISIV INAMI, which is basically the biggest or the central payer of healthcare in Belgium. I also helped start HL7 Belgium, and I'm currently the chair of HL7 Belgium. So within those roles, we have done some projects, we had some ideas to have to start the fire scene in Belgium, and it's some of those lessons that we learned that I'm going to share with you today. This is the first part where we're going to see why we did this and what's the context for these things. So exposing some of the things that we think are good ideas, a bit in a follow-up of what my colleague Robin was telling yesterday, that what we felt that we needed to do. And in the session right after this one, we will get a bit more hands-on and play with it and see actually start an implementation guide from scratch and putting all these pieces together to have one working implementation guide. So the first thing, why did we want to industrialize the production and the maintenance of implementation guides? The main driver for this is, as I said, that we wanted to start with HL7 Belgium as an important partner within the standardization scene in Belgium. And what we did is to take some mechanisms around three key areas. So community, so building up a community, enforcing collaboration or facilitating collaboration, and a strong emphasis on automation, which serves the other two. So we have a couple of actions there, and I would like to share it with you. So first thing is about the community. One of our main goals was to settle HL7 Belgium as a trusted partner for standardization in Belgium. This means that there is lots of standardization needs, standardization requirements. There's a lot of hype around FHIR nowadays, and we wanted to have one central place or one central group of people that, regardless of the roles, regardless of the regions, that could bring some trust into the discussion, so some impartial partner in the discussions. One of the things we did is, actually you see here a diagram here, so we had to set up the formalities for this. So we had to see how are we going to align with the federal standards that are officially published and have legal weight versus the way that HL7 works, which is something that is open to the community. So we want also manufacturers of software, vendors of software, to create their own specifications if they need to. We want people involved, the industry and governments and hospitals, to be involved in the same discussions without this being a typical waterfall that specifications are done in a couple of months later they hit the market. So we wanted to facilitate a bit of that dynamic, and by this we started by using working groups as a round table. So we set up a couple of working groups that everyone can join from the industry and everyone can contribute to what we are doing. So there's a roadmap, and then we gather working groups around that roadmap, and everyone can join. This has been very important to have, first of all, open discussions. So regardless of the role, regardless of the institution or the region, as I said, having a working group that is just there for one purpose, it really helps people collaborate around one central topic. So that's one of the things that making these working groups as a perfectly round table, this helps us a lot in those open discussions. Another thing that was a real interesting outcome of this is that it really also helped bring out the talent. So after a couple of sessions where in the beginning there was 2-3 people posting the requirements. Some people were more standard specialists. Some people were more focused on the publication. Some people on the community, and some people on the technical side. We started really seeing, because it's a roundtable, it's an open group. We started seeing that there are lots of talents in Belgium that we are trying to help find those talents and get people to do the things that they can without being bogged down by lots of by the work that other people can do. So if someone has some expertise around security or something, that we want to focus on that without having a very central group of 3-4 people that will tell everything. So we want to bring out more talent, which will help us in the end in what we want, which is not one central institution, but just to level the community one step higher, to build up the knowledge level about FHIR and standardization in Belgium. So currently we have a couple of working groups. We started with medication and referral. So those were very specific activities that we had. Somewhere through the process, there was a challenge around the security and encryption, and how do we send the information through different or across the different layers in a secure manner. So we had the opportunity there to step up and say, hey, this is a technical matter. So why don't we, HL7 and IHE Belgium, set up a working group for these matters, and then we have an open discussion. We bring the people to the table, and that was a very good thing to have, because then it's one working group across Belgium that had some guidance around security. And we have just started recently the lab working group. So those are the working groups that we have now. So one of the things that we did around collaboration was to try to organize our way of working so that it would reduce the queue. So this is nothing that's new. So this is all coming from Lean and even comes from the automobile industry. So how can we make our process leaner and more efficient? So some of the things that we did within the implementation guides setup, or within our process of setting up the implementation guides production, we started by segmenting work. So not only about the working groups that I just mentioned, but also starting to segment the work across the functional terminology, technical specification, and a bit of the support. So structuring things around these areas allows us to have discussions between clinicians that are not too technical, and between the technical people that are not challenging every time the business stakeholders. So we started doing this kind of approach. The same thing with terminology. So we know that there's things that we need terminology to be, it's very important, but we know that we cannot solve the terminology within the technical domain. So this is something that we also we started separating a bit the work, and you'll see the result of this. So, and of course, there is always a strong emphasis on continuous delivery and feedback, which is actually one of the reasons to have implementation guides always available. So whatever we are doing in Belgium, we always keep the implementation guide available, so that people can see where we are, what we have been doing, what we have not been doing. So this is one mechanism for feedback that we want to continue having. Another thing is, of course, getting more and more people to join the international community, namely via chat.fire.org. And it's good to see that some people are already asking questions and asking other colleagues outside. In the beginning, it was just 2 people, 3 people that we were in the position to say, okay, ask me, and maybe I ask my colleagues. But now it's really rewarding to see that people just go and ask the questions themselves. And another thing that we will also be discussing in this session a bit, and in the next session, is the sharpening of the tools. So while doing this, we realized that we have some needs in Belgium that were not yet covered by the toolkit, by the tool set in FHIR. So we just did our job and help build up those tools. So if we, by sharpening our own process and our own tools, we also have the chance to contribute to the international community tool set. So one of the things that we started doing is to define a standard way of standardization, if I can say so. So we started, according to those principles of segmenting the work, we said, okay, let's start segmenting the implementation guides themselves, so that we always have consistent products. So we always, if we look at an HL7 Belgium implementation guide, our goal is that the navigation structure is even more consistent than what is allowed. So the menu settings should be the same. Everyone should know where they go for the terminology bit, or for the use cases, or for the logical models. So that's what we wanted to endorse. And with this, we had we started an implementation guide. You can see the link here. I think I can open it if my browser is responding. It is. So it's work in progress, but we have started to capture our way of working. So there's something that we are building on, and something that we agree. Okay, naming conventions, or the way that our artifacts are working, those we have started to capture. And one of the things is this structure here, so that we have the vocabulary part, the functional bits, the technical implementation parts, and the support parts. So this is kind of a structure of an implementation guide that we want to have. These things in green are the ones that we actually have nowadays, kind of working. And the fact that we have this also forced us to have some naming conventions, and to force some things like, how do we keep history of our changes? So that's also some of the things that we will show in the session next to this one. And a bit of the using the status for handshake. This is one concrete example that we just recently discussed, is because we can do the technical implementation on the profile. So we could do profiling, but if there is a gap on vocabulary on a code system that is missing, we started using, or we think of using the status to say, okay, this profile is active, but the value set is not active, it's still draft, and we are waiting for the terminology people to do this. So this is an excellent way to say, hey guys, come on, hurry up, because we need this, otherwise we cannot really implement this in a proper way. Sometimes you can, but in most cases you cannot implement without the proper value sets being defined. So those are the groups that I mentioned. So the functional group is for supporting the business and functional discussions. So we want clinicians to have discussions without being overly contaminated with the technical side of it. So if there's something that is really specific to one implementation, so to one profile, or to one specific resource, maybe clinicians don't need to do this. Functional analysts, they need to see what is the system going to do, or what data do we have. So the functional part is supporting that, and it's structured in the use cases. So what use cases we want to achieve, what are the data needs for that, enter logical model. So that's where we have our logical models to capture the functional data needs that we have. And in the future, one of the things that was not in green in the previous diagram is the use of services. So we want to go up a bit in the governance of this, and see what do we do. So which services do we have on our roadmap? Which services do we have implemented in Fire version 4, Fire R5? Which ones do we have in the Belgian standard? And maybe we need to migrate, or maybe we don't need to migrate. So this is something that we also expect to be working on soon. And the functional discussions, they provide input to the several teams. So namely the support, of course, but especially the terminology and the technical standardization part. So having a functional group that discusses and say, okay, this is what we want, it really helps. It doesn't mean that it's a final word, because there's a couple of iterations there. As we start implementing, we realize that maybe the functional needs were not clear, or maybe something is missing, but that's fine, because we have continuous delivery for everything, and we can say, okay, we need to change the model. So we go back and change the model. So vocabulary is for people that make the vocabulary, but it's also important for everyone else. So we learn to split those a bit, but it doesn't mean that my job is not doing vocabulary, so I will not touch the vocabulary. It's everyone's problem. So we have to keep a good articulation between the vocabulary and the other parts. Technical standards is really the making of the profiles, the search parameters, and all those things, the operation definitions, everything that we need to do. And also there is also a part of creating examples. So when we make a profile, one of our criteria is that we have to have at least one example that validates that the profile is okay. Hopefully more examples. And this is also going to help in the support and implementation. So that's actually something that we can use for testing the profiles, as we will see next. So as you've seen, some emphasis on the logical models, because they really help separate the discussions. It's normal in I would say in big projects, also in small projects, that that either you have a waterfall model and it takes it takes a lot of time to have your specification or your requirements ready, and let's say that they would be ready at the end of a long time because they always need iterations. Having the logical models is a very important thing for us because we can actually agree on this is the cardinality of the elements, this is the data type, do we need this or that, is this mandatory, in which use case is this mandatory. So this is a very fundamental thing for us. It helps us, it alleviates a lot of the weight of the discussions because we can focus on the functional people giving the functional input, and we can then say, okay guys, technical guys, this is it. So it helps. Besides being a basic aspect of information governance, it allows those discussions, and it allows also the migration or mapping between standards. So what do we have in version 4? Will we maintain it in version 5? That is, I would say, much more difficult if we don't have a common logical model on top of this, especially in Belgium where we have an existing standard that exists, that works, and we don't want to just throw out everything, every good thing that we learned with that standard. We don't want to throw it away just because we have a new technical standard. So what we have been doing is capturing the functionality that we have in a logical model, and then we say, okay, this is a candidate for mapping to Fire, for managing this in Fire, which brings the managing roadmap. So having a logical model allows us to say this one is a candidate for next year for us to standardize in Fire, because it's now working in Khmer, our current standard, and we want to have it in Fire. One discussion that was interesting to realize in discussions is that there was some discrepancy or some ambiguity about whether logical models could have or not terminology constraints. In the current way of working that we have is that we say yes, because sometimes terminology constraints are functional. So if you say that this is the address, and if you want to have the country code, then that is a functional requirement that country code should be an ISO country code. Sometimes it might be an internal thing, but if you want this data to be exchanged or to be visible or to be standardized in a way that it's usable not only within two systems talking Fire, but that it follows the I don't know what some legal impositions or some external constraints on terminology, then the terminology of course belongs in the logical model. And while doing this, we have a few wants, so a few things that we would like to have in the tools, which means that, as I said before, we are sharpening our tools, so we will be working to make this happen in the tool set. And this is the part that the feedback from the community is always good, because then we see, do we want the right thing or not? So the first thing is logical model instances. So if we make a logical model, it's easy for a functional analyst to see this and to understand it. And then we would like to say, hey, make an example here, because I want to translate this example into Fire resource, but I need you to tell me the input data. So right here, the patient name, and right here, I don't know, the request number and the medication that is being requested and the time that the patient was admitted. So it would really help us to have some logical model instances, or some examples on the logical side and not only on the technical side as we have now. The other thing that we would eventually benefit from is the easier mappings. So all of this here above, you see that there's a logical model that maps between standards, maps between Fire versions, and helps us there. But managing that mapping means that we need to make the mappings. And Fire does support mappings. The trick is that it's still a bit cumbersome to manually make those mappings and put those mappings to say this logical model corresponds to that implementation or in that profile, and to that one in the new version, and this field corresponds to that part of that attribute of the logical model. So that's something that we would benefit from. And also finally on this area, the fact that currently logical models are rooted graphs. There are ongoing discussions about that those should be rooted or not. Actually, I don't know what's the status of those discussions, but it would help us not to have one logical model for prescription and one for the patient and one for encounter, but to have one overview to say, okay, these are the current bits of our entire logical model, because then we can start seeing what is duplicate, how is there consistency between we make a request for a medication and a request for a device, for example. This is something that would help to have this sort of big picture in a non-rooted graph. So terminologies was one of the areas where discussions were scattered, as I mentioned. So this is something that we had to use some tricks. Because terminologies, they handle content versus concept. So we can say there's a SNOMED code for one drug, but there is a SNOMED code for the drug itself. I don't know if that's true, but the SNOMED is a very rich terminology in that it contains the codes for content and concepts as well. Especially in Belgium, where we have 3 official languages plus English as the working language, at least some of us. We need to handle multiple language, and that is not always easy. Not only in the publication of the implementation guides. I think I have an example to show next. Making the code systems, it's still a bit difficult because the support for multiple languages, it's something that exists, but it's not very easy to use. And in Belgium, we have a strong push for SNOMED, but in practice, there is not yet practical use of SNOMED terminologies. So everyone knows that we want to use SNOMED, but the clinical practice is yet catching up with that. So it's a tricky area. So we want to use SNOMED, but we also have national codes, legacy codes, etc. And there was one example a couple of months ago that we had one of the allergens that we were identifying, and looking at the different codes, I think it was SNOMED, the translation of SNOMED was something, pétoncle. I think it's one mollusk, so it's within the seafood. But if I look at Wikipedia, then that is overly, or there is very specific set of mollusks that is not corresponding to the English translation even in SNOMED. So that was a big question mark. It's not easy because once you move from one language to the other, maybe the codes, the codes themselves, they have slightly different meanings, and we have to handle that. So if you want to standardize this on a national level, you have to take all of this into account. That's one of the reasons why we had to be a bit creative on this. For those of you who want, you can look up this code here. That's actually what we had to do. So we had to find creative ways to do this. So first of all, maximizing the work not done. So how can we be as lazy as possible, but try to force that terminology actually happens from the beginning. So one of the things that I did is that I didn't mention before is that to mark profiles as active, even if those profiles are using value sets that are themselves draft. But then we make a remark like terminology missing. This is a big red flag for the terminology people to say, hey guys, we are waiting for you. And then of course we will find a common point to when we want to publish. Some profiles we can publish with the terminology not yet being completed because the binding is an example binding, so that's okay. But some of them, because they are mission critical or because they are really important or because there is even some funding depending on this, we don't really want to publish anything with a draft value set. So that's one of the mechanisms that we found is trying to put people around the same table so that everyone speaks the same language, and then saying, okay, guys, now go everyone to their corner and let's work on this together with this kind of handshake that we have. So some things that we want to have on this. I think soon we should have the status table of each profile. We wish to have some color codes there so that if something is draft, then it shows a bit in a different color, like in yellow, for example, in comparison with the green, that if it's active. So this is something that we want to work on. This is improving the tool set. The multi-language content production, we also need to work on this. And this is actually just one example. So I had to make one, I hope you can see you can somewhat understand the Excel file here. Basically I had to have an Excel file that through some simple concatenation of characters, it creates me the concept in the code system that I needed. Because if I have to do this in JSON, I'll be busy for a long time, and this is much easier because that's the input that we get from our experts. So our experts say these are the codes. Here's an Excel file with the codes. So it was easier for us to have this poor man's solution to generate a part of the code system. But it could be better, I think, and we will see what tools are there to help on this. Also, the graph here would help to see which terminologies are used where. So this is just a dependency analysis that we would want to have. So another thing, so now on not on the vocabulary, but on the technical profiling level, we also defined some criteria and some common way of working. So each working group needs to prepare the materials, and those, we said that there should always be a logical model, so one-to-many. It's not there. There should always be, well, if a profile applies, then we profile. Sometimes we don't profile because we just want to use a resource out of the box. There's a couple of them that we don't profile, we just use them. And then like questionnaire, for example. And then we said every implementation guide should have at least one example of what it is that we are trying to achieve. So we said these are the rules. And then we help each working group prepare those materials using Sushi, Forge, or even by hand using Notepad if you want. And we want to track the history of changes. And we use the QA of the implementation guide to see where we are, what is missing, and as an exit criteria. While we are doing this, so we are trying to push our working groups to be more and more autonomous, so that we can grow them like mushrooms, more and more working groups, more and more people talking about the same thing. That's always good. And then the challenge will be governance, but that's another story. So we want to disseminate as much as possible, to industrialize as much as possible the production of those materials. And for this, we also have some ideas for the future. It will be nice when we can reuse materials from other IGs. For example, if we have one implementation guide that adds some examples of the BE patient profile, but it does not define itself the BE patient profile, we can add the examples there, but they don't show in the list. So it would be nice to have the implementation guides to say, this is a profile. It's not defined here. Here's the link, but you can see already how it is so that you don't have to navigate to the other place. This is just one idea. Again, those ideas are up for discussion. Some of them, like this one, I haven't even started any discussions on those. Another thing that we really want is the creation of example instances. So there were some discussions that we had some time ago, I think in the workflow, Fire workflow discussions, and some ideas about parameterized creation of resources. Keith Boone has written an interesting article about how could a language address these things. But while that is not there, what I had to do is to just have, as you see here on the Excel file, on the Excel screenshot, I had to create a lot of vaccine examples for the vaccination profile that we had in Belgium. So I just had the same things, just some concatenation, and then I said, okay, this is the data that I have, this data that is arriving from the stakeholders, and then with this we can just, with some minimally clever Excel thing, not even macros, just some concatenation of fields, we could actually produce something that allows us to just quickly generate one bit of sushi and another bit of sushi and another bit of sushi, and with a couple of sushi slices, you make a sushi roll, and then you put it in implementation guides. That made our lives much easier, but it could be easier. So we could skip that. We could benefit from skipping that Excel step. Also, now on the implementation side, on the testing. So what we started doing is to say at least one example, as I said. So every profile should have at least one example. And we even made one for one of our profiles. We started making sort of a front end that would allow people within the implementation guide, if we want, to create those examples. So basically, you're looking at the implementation guide and say, these are the 3 examples for this, and here's the button. You can create a new example of this profile, because then we have a UI for this. This was an attempt that we had working for one profile. There was then some challenges in making it work more generically, but maybe we get there. But what we want is still the same thing, is to have a way to generate examples, especially if we talk about logical models, because then we can tell our functional analysts, hey, why don't you go to the implementation guide and make the example that you want to do in the logical model, and then we can take it over, we can see how it is implemented. The other things that we will be working on soon is the capability statements, transforming those into open APIs. So maybe even displaying the open API, so the Swagger UI, in the implementation guide or something, I don't know yet. But one of the next steps is using the open API. And also having testing as an extra tab in the profile, so that when you look at the profile, you have the profile, you have the examples, you have the JSON, the XML, etc. And then you should have a testing tab, so that I want to see this and I want to see how this is tested. So this would be something that facilitates a bit the navigation for implementers to have clear criteria to have this. And because these things are always computable definitions, it will be awesome, because then we can say, okay, put this here on your test suite, and then just go set up your continuous delivery for that. So there is a big challenge in how to do that for apps, but we want to go there. About the tooling, so some of these things, or most of these things that we are doing now and we will be doing in the future, they will all be, or actually all the things that we'll be doing are in the HL7 Belgium GitHub repositories. Just a couple of them is the Belgian template. So some of the fancy features that we have to add, they were kind of staged, or they are being staged in the Belgian template. So we do something in the Belgian template, and that allows us to show to the rest of the community, like we are showing in 1 hour from now, some of the features. And then if this works, and after this gets sufficiently mature, we can even promote this to, or propose this to the rest of the Fire community. But as you'll see now or soon, the mechanisms are there. So all the things that we have made, they are there. They are open source. And also another thing that we did is just a bare bones implementation guide to get started. I know Sushi. So meanwhile, Sushi is already covering that. But in the beginning, we had the need to say, okay, this is an implementation guide. If you have this, and if you press the Gen once, it should build. If it doesn't build, it's your problem. But this is a bare bones implementation guide. So another thing that we have in the implementation guide of Belgium is it's actually available today for most implementation guides. Of course, documentation is still behind. Is the creation of example scenarios. Still work in progress, even in the base template for Fire implementation guides, but it already allows us to create example scenarios. So if we say this is a story, we can tell a story with these profiles like this. If I have an allergy intolerance, there is a story that someone checks, there's nothing, then someone creates something, an allergy, and then someone gets that allergy record, and someone updates that allergy record, and then they can consult it again. So to tell these things and actually being able to click to concrete examples to say, oh, this is how the JSON file looks like. This is something that we consider to be very, very powerful and very useful for documentation, especially for people that are not in the standardization universe. So this is something that we also have. And one thing that we will show later is, and I can show live depending on the time availability today, I think we are good, is the feedback feature, which is only available on the B template because it has some JavaScript and it has lots of errors in the build. So it's only available now in one slot. But what we did in Belgium, so going back to the continuous delivery and early feedback and shortening the feedback loops, what we did is to use GitHub's own Kanban to facilitate feedback. So if someone has a question about, oh, I don't see how this works, or I don't like how this works, or this text is wrong, or there's a typo there, they have one neat way, I would say, to just click a button and provide feedback on this. And this immediately shows here, which became, and this kind of Kanban board becomes an interesting tool of work, because for people that are standardizing, they see what they have to do next. This is, for example, my backlog for one of the projects. And it allows also the stakeholders, the people that say, okay, when are we there, or what we need, and then we can say, oh, this is done, this is in progress, and this is still to be discussed. So it really helps us in structuring the work and scheduling the work. So as I said before, as I hinted before, we want to step up to one level higher in the enterprise architecture. So we want not only to manage the technical content of the profiles, but to start looking at services, so business services, what IHE calls transactions, but a bit on the business level, because this is what we want to have as a roadmap. For example, for Belgium, we had a medication list. We call it medication schema. And we want to have this as part of the roadmap. So the first thing that we have to see is to identify is what service are we providing? So, and who is going to provide that service? Where is it implemented? Is it already implemented in an existing standard, or is it something completely new? It's very important to put this on the roadmap. So that's one of the things that we want to do on a more, let's say, technical level. And most important is to continue growing the community of people that can actually implement Fire and can actually profile Fire. Foster adoption, so do whatever we need to do to have the vendors adopting Fire in a faster way and in a way that makes our work of standardization more effective towards them. And of course, as we've been doing, supporting the FIRE ecosystem. So if there's any ideas in Belgium that are worthy for the rest of the community, then we are just happy to provide them. And this is something that I'm grateful for the stakeholders that we have in Belgium. There is a very good, very collaborative feeling in Belgium that what we do, we want to benefit the rest of the community, because we know that we'll be benefiting from this as well. We can go through some examples. I don't know if we have questions so far.
So far, I don't.
Okay, let's assume that's a good sign. So I'm just going to open one of the implementation guides for the. So I had it here, but I closed all the windows, so then I lost it. So this is one of the implementation guides that we have. It's still work in progress, but it has some of the features that I wanted to show you. They are here, so you can see. I will show you the example scenario. For example, this is something that we have already in place. So this is the continuous build, so everyone can see what we're up to. And this is, of course, the links are not working. That's a demo effect, but this should actually show me the JSON that I have somewhere in here. So this is the links are still broken because of something that I was not expecting. But this is one of the things. The other things that we have is the for example, the feedback. Actually, I can show this. We are going to look at this also next. But if I want to give feedback on that example scenario, I just click a button and I just have this box open here, and I say this needs to be detailed. And then I just say, and I submit. And what we did, just for awareness of what we are going to see in the next session, is that not only we have the QA report, that's the normal QA report that comes out of the implementation guide builder, we also have the issues. And this actually leads us to the same Kanban board that I was showing before. So actually, this should be the issue that I have. Yeah, so there it is. So this allows very quick feedback, so allows a very short feedback. If people don't understand it, if it's not clear, it goes into the sandbox, because it doesn't mean that we'll act on this, but then it goes here where we can say, okay, is this something that we want to fix? Is this something that we want to reject? And if we want to fix, who is going to fix it? And then we assign it, and then the usual stuff, then we just play with the Kanban board as we always do. So this is something that helps us in collaboration. The other things that I wanted to show just as a preview for the next session is the COVID vaccine. So we had a profile on the COVID vaccine, not this one, this one. So this is what we are going to see next. And we have all those things that we did that I was talking about. So we start with the logical model. Also in Belgium, we started with the logical model. So this is just a copy of this, but we have a logical model where we have those discussions. And one example of those discussions has been, and some of you may have been in the discussion in chat, that there is a difference between the code of the disease, for example, COVID, and the actual product that you're giving, which can be the Pfizer vaccine, or can be the Moderna vaccine, or it can be any other vaccine. So the idea is that we wanted to have these two as separate entities in our logical model. So that's what our logical model says. Whether this corresponds to one element in FIRE or two elements or an extension, that's another discussion. But this is one example of when we say this is what we get from the functional discussions. This is what we know will happen, or we know we need. Sorry. And then what happens on the technical side, that's the technical implementation, but at least the technical experts, they know exactly what they have to achieve. They have to achieve that it's possible to differentiate COVID-19 versus the actual brand or the actual product that is there. So this is one example of what we have been doing, and I think that's it for examples. Yeah, and the Belgian, and of course we have this way of working implementation guide that we have. This shows a bit also the naming conventions that we have. So we have, so for example, when we have the, let me just show this, the naming conventions are not here. The naming conventions are here. Just because we needed to facilitate our own work, we said, okay, for profiles, this is where the profile will reside. This is the resource ID should be looking like this. The file name should be the same as the ID and the resource name. So we started doing some naming conventions to facilitate navigation. Otherwise, as it's no longer one person or two people, but it's lots of people working on these things, you have to have some consistency on the artifacts that people produce. Otherwise, it's hard to hand over the work. And I think we are 5 minutes short of before the end of the session. I would ask if there is any questions.
Thank you, José. So far, there's no questions yet in the Q&A book. So please, everyone, if you have any questions, post them in the Q&A box. In the meantime,
hello, I posted a couple of questions in Q&A. I think they're like probably
sorry.
6.
Me too.
You may need to refresh.
I'm so sorry. In the chat, I don't see them.
The 2 to quarter to 3 session has a Q&A, which has a couple of questions.
Quarter to 3. I'm in a 2 to quarter to 3 session.
Okay.
So yeah, maybe Alexander and who else was asking, you can just
ask the questions.
Maybe first, Alexander.
Yeah, maybe this is Steven. How did you transform the data from the file profile to OpenAPI and back? How do you manage that synchronization? And how does the OpenAPI specification for your file profile look like? I think that's a big challenge of mapping from file to OpenAPI.
Actually, that's one of the things that I said we did not yet. So there's some discussion on this. I think Gino and other people were looking at making this possible. I did some attempts, and some colleagues from my team, they did some attempts at doing this, but because of the way that the JSON schema was working or not working, it was difficult to have something that would be mappable. So what I personally had an experiment, and I made one page in the implementation guide, so just one tab, just for playing with it. But I had to do a lot of manual work on the schema to have this in a way that the Swagger UI could digest. So the short answer is we didn't yet. I hope there's some white smoke on that one, but not yet, not from our side yet.
Thanks.
Sorry if it's not the best answer.
So then, Alexander?
Oh, I've got lots of questions,
Sure.
but I know you offline, so maybe I see other questions from David Simons and Ankita Sastava, so maybe they could go first.
As you wish.
Yeah, so I have a query related to sample write app. So you mentioned that this is a UI, and this will convert data into JSON in the backend, right? So is it available for general usage also, or
no, it's
just for?
I assume that you mean the app that I was showing with a small form for entering resource data.
Yeah, correct.
This one. Yeah, so this is something that we had to do custom for one profile. So we have this app working. I will check if the source is something that we can share, but this was made for our Belgian communication profile. There was an attempt to have this as an automated conversion, and there still is some effort on that. I do not know when that is going to happen, but at this moment, this is limited to the Belgian communication profile, which means that if you want to take a look at this, I'll check what it is. I would ask you to please get in contact with me after this session, and then I will be able to follow up.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
I'll show my contact details. Meanwhile, while we wait for more questions, just oh, I don't have my contact details. My best contact details is through chat. Actually, that's preferred way of communicating. Just always chat.fire.org. And apologies, I should not have deleted the last slide. More questions?
I will go next if David is not able to ask his question. How far along are you production-wise? Are people implementing what you've specified so far? And if you are in production, did that change anything in the way you release and publish and have your procedures going?
Good, very good question. So there is now a couple of pilots because so my work is on the official institution, so that it's a bit more. It goes into the regional vaults of information. So there's a couple of pilots to adopt this. So the servers are there. They are experimenting with it. Last week we had a couple of more tests. There's more and more companies trying to test these things. There was a couple of weeks ago, a couple of months ago, there was a test for the allergy profiles, but we don't have those systems yet in production. And how did we learn with this? Yeah, every time that we had this piloting sessions, then we got something else. For example, we have our allergen list was I think the binding was example, if I'm not mistaken, but during this we realized, or some people realized, that the quality of data was so low, so people just put whatever, or they put things in their own language, even if the code existed. So we actually made it required binding, just as an experiment to see, does this get better, or are people still just going to ignore that and not send information all over. So this actually influences not only the process, but actually the profiles themselves. It's early, but that's the feedback we have so far.
And do you have a one-size-fits-all package? And do you put every use case in a single implementation guide, or do you have multiple with dependencies underneath?
Good. I should have another diagram here, which is, so our approach is that we have the legal standards. They are published by the eHealth platform. So those are the ones that are legal standards. Before something gets the legal status, it is published by HL7 Belgium. Some of them might not even qualify for legal standard because there might be a conflict, or there might not be interest to make that as a legal standard yet. So we have at least those two layers of implementation guides, and then on top of that we have the projects, or below that we have the projects. So every project makes their own implementation guides, and then we start collecting bits. That's what we are doing now for the next release. We say, okay, this institution has these profiles that they proposed as a candidate, and it has been accepted as a candidate for a federal standard. So we just go and take the conformance resources and we put them in the implementation guides. That's what we are doing now. I don't know if it's good or bad practice, but that's the idea, is that we will migrate the artifacts from one implementation guide to the other.
It's interesting. We have law coming up next year called DevDays, which allows you to make implementation guides for certain use case required for the industry. So we are on a path to where you already are, and I should probably learn from you this round.
I was hoping that I could learn from you, but we will follow this up offline.
Yes.
That's very good.
We're running out of time, so maybe you can take it offline.
As a wrap up, so as we've seen, so it's easy to make one implementation guide. Our effort has been how to make a community make implementation guides. It requires a lot of things, so we have some tips that we shared with you. Make sure the feedback loops are short, set up the group, set up the community, and most important, give a little bit to the community, to the FHIR community, and receive a lot. That's our experience, that sometimes we have some questions that save us a lot of work just by having a 5-minute discussion with people that have gone through the same thing. So I would thank you. I think we're over time now. Thank you very much for joining, and talk to you, or to some of you at least, in the next session in a few minutes.
Yeah, so thanks everyone for joining. Please note that the Q&A will still be open after the session, so you can still post your questions there. And also please rate this session, because we would like to know what you think about it. And enjoy the rest of DevDays.
Thank you very much.